Well, hello everybody. You're very welcome to this presentation, Gaeilge, Timpeall, Orainn, or Irish All Around Us. This is a short project I was asked to do with community development, just to have a look and see where Irish exists in our world. So come join me and we'll have a little look at the various places that we use Irish in everyday life. As I say, Irish is all around us. Gaeilge, Timpeall, Orainn. And what better to start with than with the place names that we have in our area. And if we look at a few of them, for example, these ones we have, everybody would be familiar with Drimna. So Drimna is the sandy ridges, Drumnach. Oh, did you ever think about Crumlin village? Say Shrodballia Crumglina. What might that mean? Well, Crumglina is the Crooked Glen. So it is actually the village at the top of the Crooked Glen, and the Crooked Glen that we're talking about in this case is the Lansdowne Valley. So Crumglina, we call it Crumlin today. That means the Crooked Valley. But one of my favourites is this one, Kimmage. When we look at the old Irish sign that we have here on Kimmage Road West, you see the words Cam Ishke written there. Of course, Camishke means clear water. This is a reference to the river Poddle through that area. So in three suburban place names, Drimna, Crumlin and Kimmage, we have Old Irish being used in everyday language as we describe our places, the places that we live in. And they're a great example of some of the place names in Dublin that actually cover the Old Irish words. But we've more of that, more than that. So come with me now to two more places. Chapelizod, for example, is Chapel Isolde, Chapel of Isolt or Isolt. And it refers to that old chapel in the village of Chapelizod, bringing us right back to our medieval past. And it's in a name like Chapelizod, nothing to do with animals or lizards or anything like that, but everything to do with Chapel Isolde. And of course, nearby Ballyfermot is another great example of an old Irish place name. Ballyfermot or Ballydermot is the town of Dermot, probably a chieftain, dating back hundreds of years, and yet we call it Ballyfermot today. So in all the place names that we have all around us, we find Irish words that we're using every single day. Ballia means town. We call it Bally in Ballyfermot, for example. We use the Irish in unusual ways, and they're in other place names as well, and in other things that we give names to. And here's two things that we have in Dublin, two of the key tributaries of the River Liffey, the Dodder and the Tolka. But both of these are Irish words also. Dodder means unduthruk, and that means turbulent. So you can see how we describe the river in its actual name. And Tolka is another one. Tolka actually comes from Antolka, which means flood. So even the word Tolka is a corruption, a slight anglification of the Irish word for flood. So in describing our rivers, we're describing what they do. And of course, when we're talking about things, we'll take a look at these scenes, which Dublin City Council kindly provided me with. And I think you'll agree with me, these are serious floods. This is the Harris Cross area of Dublin, 11. And you can see that we were in serious trouble at this time. Cars submerged, the fire brigade pumping people out, roads absolutely flooded and unrecognisable, gardens flooded, everything in the area. And this again can be attributed to another one of Dublin's rivers. And again, when we look at its name and we consider how it might be from Irish, what about the Poddle? The old Irish word for Poddle, from which we get its name, is an Puchail, and that means overflowing pot. And I think you'll agree with me that in those images, it certainly was living up to its name in 2011. So even something as simple as the Poddle gives us a clue in its name because it comes from the old Irish word Puchail, overflowing pot. I particularly love this map of medieval Dublin. It dates back to 1906, but it's describing a time way, way back before that. It's around the 1200s of Dublin itself. And what we can see, firstly, from the image is that the River Poddle on Pujail was very, very important to the city. You see it there at the middle, top of the screen, more or less, and it forms part of the moat around Dublin Castle before discharging as a tributary into the River Liffey itself. Of course, it's that area of Dublin there that gives us the old Irish word for Dublin, Dovlin, Blackpool. So in actual fact, Dublin itself is actually an Irish word, Dovlin, Blackpool, and it's formed by the River Poddle. But it's the other part of the map that I'd just like to draw your attention to. One of my old favourite names in Dublin, over on the right-hand side of the map, you see it have a circled there. And it's about the only Gaelic word that was left in the Norman city of Dublin, Mullinahack, a small little area just outside the walls of Dublin. Let's have a closer look at its place name. Mullinahack. Now, I really would need this recording to go out after 9 o'clock at night in order to give this a full description, but we can break it down and we can have a look at it and see, can we make out the words. So the first part of it, Mullina, is actually from the Irish word millen, for a mill. That's the word for a mill. Ancáca, well, Ancáca meant it wasn't a very nice mill. In fact, it was a very dirty mill, and you can use any adjective that's in the line of dirty if you want to really break this one down. So this is a very old mill on the outside of the city, Dublin, and it was the mill at the very, very end of the line. It was going to have all the dirt, all the unwanted items from a city would all find their way into this particular mill before it discharged itself into the River Liffey. So Mullinahack, Mullinahack is one of our old Irish names in the city of Dublin. Here's a couple more. Inchicore. Inchicore itself comes from the Irish Inchicorca, which means the island of the sheep. Inchicarach would be another version of it. This is the part of Dublin where, when the farmers were bringing the sheep up for market, they would have grazed them at Inchicore to fatten them up just before market itself. It possibly refers to a very old island that would have been somewhere in the River Liffey, quite near this area. Like a lot of our townlands, the areas they described have moved in time, but it actually comes from the Irish Inchicarach or Inchiquare, meaning the island of the sheep. Dolphin's Barn is the other one that I have up there. And of course, it's the Irish version of that name that we find, say, when we go to the post office. So we see it on the buses on Carnon or Carnon Cluck. Now, that refers to a burial mound that would have existed up near the Crumlin Shopping Centre, across the road from it. And it was a landmark, a boundary landmark on the outskirts of the city. On Carnon or Carnon Cluck was hugely important to the city fathers as they were marking out the boundary of the city itself. So Carnon on Carnon means a mound or a burial mound, and Cluck is the Irish word for stone, so it was a burial mound of stones. Tradition has it that this was, to give it its full name, was Carnon Cluck I Dunica, which meant it was the burial mound of the Dunphy clan. So I don't know if we have any of the Dunphys still around, but the Carnon Cluck was the important part, and Dolphin's Barn is a later name given to the area. Now, we all probably know this from our history on Gurtha Moor, the Great Hunger or the Great Famine, the Irish famine, which ran from about 1845 to about 1847. Now, believe it or not, this huge displacement of people, a lot of people left the hunger to go to the cities to passage away from Ireland. Some stayed in the city areas. And this massive displacement of people had a huge effect on our city areas. It had a particular effect on the liberties of Dublin. When people moved up to Dublin, they followed the line of the canals to come into the city. A lot of people would have used the Grand Canal to come into the city, and the terminus of the Grand Canal would have brought them to the back of Guinness's, the Liberties of Dublin itself. It's because of that, it's like this one from Maureen Johnson's great book, By the Banks of Pimlico. In Maureen's book, she particularly talks about Irish being the language of the home. Liz, they're gone all day. Irish was the language of the home, and some of their old neighbours from Gort lived nearby, as well as native Irish speakers from other parts of the country. The language was kept alive in the area for many, many years. Maureen tells us in her book that it wasn't until her granny started school at School Street, where teaching was through English, that the Irish language began to take a secondary place in the home. In order to survive in a developing industrial setting, it was necessary to get an education, and the only one that was available at the time was English. Marlborough Lane, that general area, wasn't the only part of the Liberties to have a long-standing Gaeltacht. Another area was Blackpits itself, where up to about 2 generations back, Irish would have been spoken in the home as well. So this is the displacement of people from old Irish-speaking parts of the country, and they come up to Dublin to actually set up in the city and keep their language, keep their tradition, keep their norms and their values. And it only changes when it's forced to change. It's a wonderful find and a lovely recording by Maureen of her family and the way they spoke Irish in a mini Gaeltacht that would have existed in the Marlborough Lane area of Dublin. Another reference that I found was this one, to St. Kevin's Church of Ireland on the South Circle Road. I have an old image of it there, taken when the trams would have run along the South Circle Road. For those who don't know it, you'll recognise it as being the big red building between Leonard's Corner and Heytesbury Street. The one thing that was significant about this Church of Ireland was that it held an annual Irish language service on a St. Patrick's Day. And this attracted large crowds and was regularly reported on in the newspapers of the time. So all around the 1890s, every single year, it held its service on a Patrick's Day in the Irish language. Again, it's another unexpected find and shows how prominent the Irish language was in all traditions that existed in Dublin City itself. Here's an interesting one, and it brings us up to our revolutionary time. I have in front of you the 1911 census record of Eamon Cant, one of our leaders of the 1916 Rising. At the time, Eamon Cant was living in Herberton Lane, which is now Herberton Road in Rialto in Dublin. He fills out his census record as Gaeilge, and all of it is done in the old Irish script. Not only that, we know his marriage record in James's Street is entered in Irish. And in fact, his marriage, which had taken place in James's Street Church, was recorded in Irish and conducted through the Irish language. They continued it then through their marriage when their child Ronan was christened in Dolphin's Barn. Again, his baptismal entry is in Irish. So even in the more unusual places, you'll find the Irish language being used. And this was Eamon Cant and his wife Anya living up to their tradition, their norm, and using the Irish language as a way of protest, but also as a way of record. So when we're searching for more information on the Cants, we find their entries, their official documentation was filled out in Irish. And it's a lovely example of the census records being completed in Irish. You find a few of them, not many, but there are a few of them, and they all use the old Irish script, and Eamon Cant's is probably one of the best examples that we have. even the Cumann women, who featured highly in the general Dublin 8 area, as we would describe it today. Their publication was Ban na Héireann, the Women of Ireland. So again, they used every opportunity to include the Irish language as part of our identity. And you can see here that they're calling back on the old Celtic revival in the imagery that they were using for the headed paper or the title page of their publication. It reflects all of the values of the Celtic revival, the Celtic dress, the Tara brooch, even the round tower in the background, and the banner headline, Ban na Héireann itself. Came across this one. I want to thank local Anne Flynn for making this available to me. This is an example of the certificates that would have been issued, the primary certificates that were issued to students coming out of James's School in the 1930s. Everything on the certificate is as Gaeilge. So we were using it in every means possible to promote the language. Every single detail, even mathematique is mentioned there, Berle, star, that's history. All of those things are mentioned on the certificate that was issued to Anne's father when he left James's Street School. And you often find these among old papers. Even scholarships were offered in Irish if you wish to go on to another level. A third level it would be today, but if you wanted to go on to do another course after leaving school, you could do your scholarships through Irish. It's a wonderful find and beautifully presented, and it was such a big occasion moving from finishing up in your primary school. A lot of people stayed on until about the age of 14 in primary school at these times, and you left with this piece of paper, as Gaeilge, as you did so. Of course, then there was other ways that Irish was all around us. And we've two lovely examples in the Uffic and Wisht that formerly existed. This one was in Cork Street in Dublin, and I have another image that I show you in a moment. But it's absolutely lovely to see that the formal post office, Uffic and Wisht, held the old Irish phrase and the old Irish writing included in the shop front. The other one I have is from Thomas Street in Dublin, again Uffic and Wisht. This was the old Liberties post office that existed at the very top of Bridgeford Street, right on the corner of Thomas Street. I wonder what was going on that particular day where the individual is being met by a couple of An Garda Síochána, which is another example of Irish in the community, and the other character in the doorway taking it all in. But what is particularly wonderful about this is the old sign writing above the shop front itself, Uffic and Wisht, a way of using Irish in the community, using it on our shop fronts. And it means that Irish, you were absorbing Irish by osmosis nearly, by seeing it on things like your post office. It became known as the Uffic and Wisht. You were going down to the post office. It became part of the norm, part of the language that we use. And of course, there was this other lovely little gem in Thomas Street in Dublin on Shoppa Milshawn, the sweet shop. And on Shoppa Milshawn sold everything. It sold mass cards. It had everything available. It even sold cigarettes. It doesn't say that in the top of the shop itself. But on Shoppa Milshawn was another well-known landmark in the Thomas Street area. And a big thank you to Noel Fleming and to Mark Jenkins for sourcing the image for me to use today. As you can see, again, a way of using the names of the shops to use our language in another way, to give the place an identity and to actually use the Irish language. Remember, this was the part of Dublin that had many Gaeltachts post the famine. So the Irish language was still very much part of what you were doing in the area. Other things, when we go to look at officialdom, when we go to check things, say, about Dáil Éireann, there's more Irish words that we use. And even the way we describe the members of the Dáil, the official Irish title for each member of the Dáil is Teach the Dála. It means a deputy to the Dáil, and members are generally called the TD. So when we could describe a member of our parliament as our TD, we are shortening the word Teach the Dála which is actually Gaelic for a deputy to the Dáil. So we use Irish in various ways and we don't even realise we're doing it. You'd have to explain what a TD was to somebody from another country, because they would probably call them an MP, a member of parliament. We call them our TDs, and we even shorten the Irish word and we call it Dáil Éireann. We always refer to it as the Dáil. We would rarely call it a parliament. So even using Irish words like that is, and when we look up official documents or look up official websites, we'll find Irish on all of them. And when I say Irish is all around it, I really mean it, because even the Lewis is an Irish word, and Lewis means speed. Now, I'm not so sure the Lewis goes that fast from one stop to another. We'll allow it go fast, I'd say, between Rialto and Sure Bridge. But generally, what the word Lewis actually means is speed. So we gave the name to our tram network, but maybe a little bit tongue-in-cheek in doing so. But again, it's another Irish word that we use in daily life, and we don't even realise we're doing it. And it's a reference, another handy word that you have in your Gaelic speech, that you can use the word Lewis and it will cover, we know it's describing the tram network, but it actually means speed. There's so many words in the English language that all have their roots in the Irish language. And I have a few of them here, and I'd say some of them you've never really thought about before. How about when you hear somebody saying galore in English? It means galore in Irish, meaning plenty. A slew, a multitude, comes from the Irish word salua, or even a shebeen. It actually means a mugful or a hut tavern, and it comes from the Irish word shebeen. We've often heard the word smithereens used, and that, of course, means little bits, but it comes from the Irish word smithereeny. A slob, a muddy slobland. We often hear the Wexford slobs, for example. That's an Irish word, but it comes from the Irish word slab, which means mud. Or even when we call somebody a brat, where actually means a rough rag or a cloak, and it is the Irish word brat that is actually the exact translation of a rough rag or a cloak. You'd never think a word like phony actually comes from Irish. It comes from a phony or a fáine, and it actually refers to swindlers, maybe at a fair, using a brass ring to fool you, meaning you'd expect it to have been gold and you discover it was brass. A false ring, a phony or a fáine, and it comes into English as being phony, the word phony. You often hear people, particularly our American cousins, use the word shenanigans an awful lot, and it comes from sugar queen, which means I play the fox. So you're acting up, basically, and it's actually a direct translation from Irish. And shuna cugim means shenanigans, comes through as shenanigans, and it means I play the fox. But what about the word mentor? We often hear people saying, he's my mentor. He was my mentor in college. He influenced me. He taught me so much. Comes from the Irish word muinteoir, meaning teacher. Malarkey comes from mullican, a ruffian. A banshee, we often hear of the banshee crying, the fairy woman who was going to proclaim a terrible disaster that was coming. It was the banshee in Irish, B-A-N-S-I fada, and in English it's banshee, meaning the fairy woman. A boreen is a bohereen, a small road. Brogues, very fashionable a few years ago, comes from the Irish word brogue, meaning shoe. A slogan comes from Sluagarum, a battle cry used by the Gaelic clans. And of course, Colleen is a Colleen, a girl. So we have so many words we use in English that are actually Irish words and have a meaning that relates to the way we use them in the English language. So we find Irish creeping in so many, many ways. And it's a handy way of remembering a few new bits of words that we can add to our vocabulary as we go along. Our turn of phrase. So we've often say, what's the crack? Crack is purely a Gaelic word, meaning having a kind of a meaning relating to all sorts of fun or what. It's a particular type of fun. We all instinctively know what it means. It's very hard to explain it, but crack is actually an Irish word. What about me and me mat? Mat comes from Mahan Colleen, meaning a good girl, or it could be Mahambukal if we want to take it that far. But the mat is pure Dublinese, using an Irish word. When we raise a glass, when we all can again, we'll all say sláinte, meaning health, your good health. Cheers in another language. It can be, it's used internationally now. You find people use the sláinte. And even when we use that phrase, Maria, we're actually speaking Irish. So we say, he pretended, Maria, and we throw it out there, but we're actually using an Irish phrase as we speak. It's even creeping into Twitter, and this is where it can be quite fun. Hashtags on Twitter using Irish words. One of the more recent ones related to the snow. So when snow appears on Twitter, people are talking about it. A little bit of white stuff has come out of the sky, all around, the powdery white stuff coming around all around us gets us all very excited. And now they're using the hashtag Sneachtain every time that happens. We've seen it trending on a number of occasions over the last few months, and it's inclined to be used much more than the word snow as a hashtag. One of the more amusing ones came out of Dublin Airport not that long ago. They reported that there was a huge amount of rain had fallen in Dublin Airport, and they opened their actual account on Twitter with what the fluck being the Irish word for flood or for wet. So there was more rain in an hour than in the whole month of May. Definitely a soft start to the day, hashtag fluck. So we can use the Irish humorously, but we're using it as Twitter hashtags and getting the message across about how Irish is all around us. And sometimes we need the little bit of Irish to make sense of it all. So if you look really closely at the Marrowbone Lane street sign, we really need to go to the Irish version of that name to make sense of everything, because it has nothing to do with marrows or bones, but everything to do with the Irish that's there. Lana Wira Wa. Lana Wira Wa refers to Marylebone Lane, the French name of that original lane. And we managed to mangle Marylebone into Marrowbone. But when we go to the Irish, we actually find out that we translated it from French to Irish and then mangled the French and English. So you need the Irish language sometimes to make sense of everything. I hope you'll agree with me that is smahishin, that it was smashing, because that's where we get the word smashing. That simple little Irish phrase is smahishin. And I hope you agree with me that my short talk today was smashing is smahishin. Thank you all. Gura mahagut agus slán.